This is Commission Vice President Toshiko Hasegawa convening the regular meeting of October 24th, 2023. The time is 10:31 a.m. We're meeting in person today at Sea-Tac International Airport Conference Center and virtually via Microsoft Teams. Present with me today are Commissioners Calkins, Fellman, and Mohammed, who are currently gathered in the executive session room awaiting the opening of the public meeting. Commissioner Cho is absent and excused from the meeting. We'll now recess into executive session to discuss one item regarding litigation or potential litigation or legal risk per RCW 42.30.110, Section 1A, and collective bargaining per RCW 42.30.1404 for approximately 30 minutes, and separately, one item regarding litigation or potential litigation or legal risk per RCW 42.30.110, Section 1A for approximately 30 minutes, and will reconvene into public session at 12 noon. Thank you.
And then, Madam Commissioner President, just one correction. I understand just from Aaron Pritchard just a few minutes ago that Commissioner Cho may be joining the executive session.
Virtually?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. We are in recess.
This is Commission Vice President Toshiko Hasegawa reconvening the regular meeting of October 24th, 2023. The time is 12:06 p.m. We're meeting in person today at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport Conference Center. Clerk Hart, please call the roll of all the commissioners in attendance.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner President. Beginning with Commissioner Calkins.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Fellman is in the building, and I am assuming will be joining us shortly. Commissioner Hasegawa.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Mohammed.
Present.
Thank you. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. A few housekeeping items before we begin. For everyone in the meeting room, please turn your cell phones on to silent. For anyone participating on Teams, please mute your speakers when not actively speaking or presenting. Please also keep your cameras off unless you're a member of the commission or the executive director participating virtually, or if you're a member of staff in a presentation and are actively addressing the commission. Members of the public addressing the commission during public comment may turn on their cameras when their name is called to speak, and we'll turn them back off again at the conclusion of their remarks. For anyone at the dais here today, please turn off the speakers on any computers and silence your devices. Please also remember to address your request to be recognized to speak through the chair and wait to speak until you have been recognized. You'll turn your microphones on and off as needed. All of the items noted here will ensure a smoother meeting. Thank you so much for your cooperation. All votes today will be taken by the roll call method, so it's clear for anyone participating virtually how votes are cast. Commissioners will say aye or nay when their name is called. We are meeting on the ancestral lands and waters of the Coast Salish people with whom we share the commitment to steward these natural resources for future generations. This meeting is being digitally recorded and may be viewed or heard at any time at the Port's website and may be rebroadcast by King County Television. Please stand or join us now for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item of business today is the approval of the agenda. As a reminder, if a commissioner wishes to comment for or against an item on the consent agenda, it is not necessary to pull the item from the consent agenda. Rather, you may offer support or opposing comments later in this meeting once we get to the consent agenda. Please wait until the motion to approve the consent agenda in order to make your comments. However, it is appropriate at this time if a commissioner wants to ask questions of staff or wish to have a dialogue on a consent agenda item to request that the item be pulled for a separate discussion. So with that, commissioners, are there any items to be pulled from consent or any motions to rearrange the orders of the day? Yes, Commissioner Fellman.
Yeah, I'd like to have item 8H, any item that has a cost of $200 million seems to need to have at least some public airing. And so this current request is $50 million. I mean, yeah. So just, there's talking about, as you know, paving, but there's associated utilities and things like that. I just think it's too big a number not to have some discussion.
Okay, very well. Thank you. Commissioner Fellman has pulled item 8H from the consent agenda. Are there any other items to be pulled from the consent agenda? Any motions to rearrange or proceedings of the day? So now the question is on approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
The motion has been made and seconded by Commissioners Mohammed and Calkins. Is there any objection to approval of the agenda? And seeing none, it is approved. So we have no special orders of the day, which means that we can move into our Executive Director's report. Executive Director Metrick, take it away.
Vice President, thank you. How's it going? Good afternoon, Commissioners. In between meetings, I spent the last week at the Global Maritime Forum Summit in Athens, Greece, and I'd like to just talk about that for a second. The summit was an incredible opportunity to be with like-minded industry leaders and other stakeholders across the maritime industries, especially our sister ports in Singapore and Rotterdam. In the wake of this summer's International Maritime Organization's commitments to maritime decarbonization, there was significant discussion at the GMF of what will be needed to advance zero-emission fuels from a policy, technology, and partnership level. In particular, there was great discussion of green corridors, and it was a really good opportunity to learn more about how our international partners are pursuing their parallel efforts and look for lessons learned between us. And I look forward to sharing more about the detailed takeaways about this with you all at a later date. In other maritime news, while our 2023 cruise season is not yet over, I'm very pleased to share that it was our most successful ever, with an estimated 1.7 million revenue passengers. Considering that the season, which ends on October 30th, was projected to see 1.4 million passengers, this is quite a milestone. There'll be much more in our end-of-season recap, but I want to thank the incredible maritime and aviation staff and partners who helped facilitate this record-breaking year. Of course, we measure our success in cruise not only on the economic impact, but how we continue to lean into sustainability and decarbonization. To that end, we can all celebrate the great news from the last week that the Pacific Northwest was selected by the U.S. Department of Energy to be a regional clean hydrogen hub, eligible to receive $1 billion in federal funding to pursue development and implementation of green hydrogen as an energy source. Congratulations to our partners at the Northwest Seaport Alliance who have funded projects as part of this hub, and special thanks to the port's Senior Environmental Program Manager, David Fujimoto, for his efforts to represent the Port of Seattle in this important work. Moving in today's commission meeting, and I'd like to highlight a few items. On the consent agenda, we have a project that will replace two outdated flat configuration baggage carousels with more modern slanted configuration units. This replacement will free up additional square footage in our constrained airport that can be used for tenant space build-out. We also have Phase 4 of our passenger loading bridges. These are critical and essential infrastructure for operating an airport and are part of our continuing effort at renewal and upgrading our facilities. And also, I'm going to comment here, this is pulled from the agenda, but we had on the consent agenda, now pulled into the agenda. It's our next phase of our aviation pavement program. These multi-year programs continue to ensure airfield pavement and utility assets are managed in a safe and effective fashion. Maintaining this infrastructure is critical and essential for airport operations, and I want to give special thanks to the great work of the aviation finance team who have been incredibly successful in securing federal grants for these projects. In developing this proposed plan of finance, moving to the next subject there, which is our proposed tax levy and plan of finance, and in developing this proposed plan of finance, which we'll be discussing later in the program, we've been focused on how to make historic and strategic investments in port infrastructure, programs, in our workforce and communities, while simultaneously ensuring the financial responsibility and sustainability of our organization. After today's briefing, the full proposed budget will be released to the public on Thursday with a press release and interactive website in advance of the first reading at our next commission meeting. So, Commissioners, this concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Executive Director Metrick. And that brings us to the committee report section of our agenda. And I'd like to welcome Commission Strategic Advisor Erica Chung to provide the report. She's online.
Hello, good afternoon, Vice President Hasegawa, Commissioners, Executive Director Metrick. I have 3 committee reports for you today. On October 17, Commissioners Mohammed and Calkins convened the Aviation Committee. The committee discussed aviation dining and retail opportunities coming available in the near term and the timeline for opportunities into the future. Also on October 17, Commissioners Hasegawa and Calkins convened the Equity and Workforce Development Committee. Commissioners heard an update on the Youth Maritime Career Launch Program and gave their input as to ways to further diversify the applicant pool and keep employees engaged in the program. OEDI and budget staff also presented to commissioners on the Port's equity and budgeting efforts. Commissioners checked in on staff's capacity to administer the program and heard that work done in prior years has streamlined the efforts this year. Also on October 17, the Port-wide Arts and Culture Board met with Commissioner Cho attending. The board was introduced to Tamar Benziri, the newest public member to the board, and discussed the terms and process of onboarding new members. The board also received a briefing on AV Art funding authorization for 2024, discussed the board's work plan for 2024, and an update of remaining projects for 2023. A couple of events that are coming up include a one-night event featuring Neon by Kelsey Fernkoff in collaboration with Pilchuck School of Glass at the SCA Cell Lot Hill 10 on Saturday, November 4th from 5 to 9 p.m. and New Icons Portraits of Burn Survivors art by Grace Athena Float and reception at Pier 69 on December 19, 2023 at 4 p.m. This concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Erica? All right. Moving forward, we are now at the public comment section of our agenda. The Port Commission welcomes public comment as an important part of the public process. Comments are received and considered by the Commission in its deliberations. Before we take public comment, we'd like to review our rules for in-person and virtual comment. Clerk Hart, please play the recorded rules.
The Port of Seattle Commission welcomes you to our meeting today. As noted, public comment is an important part of the public process, and the Port of Seattle Commission thanks you for joining us. The Commission accepts in-person, virtual, and written public comment regarding matters related to the conduct of port business. Before we proceed, here are the Commission's public comment rules of procedure for your information. Each commenter will have 2 minutes to speak and should stay within the allotted time. A timer will
I think that video
appear on the
just timed
screen,
out.
and a buzzer will sound at the end of the 2-minute period for each speaker. The Commission reserves the right to receive comments specifically related to the conduct of port business. If comments are not related to the conduct of port business, the presiding officer will stop the speaker and ask that comments be kept to matters related to the conduct of port business. This rule applies to both introductory and concluding remarks. All remarks should be addressed to the Commission as a body and not to individual commissioners. Disruptions of Commission public meetings are prohibited. Disruptions include, but are not limited to, the following: refusal of a speaker to limit remarks to topics related to the conduct of port business, threats and abusive or harassing behavior and language, obscene language and gestures, refusal of a speaker to comply with the allotted time set for the individual speaker's public comment, leaving the podium or testimony table to physically approach commissioners or staff during one's public comment, provided speakers may author written materials to the Commission clerk, and any behavior that disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the meeting. Any disruption will result in a speaker's microphone being immediately shut off by the presiding officer, and a warning or loss of speaking privileges or removal from the meeting room may occur, as provided in the Commission's bylaws. Written materials provided to the clerk will be included in today's meeting record. The clerk has a list of those prepared to speak. We are taking comments from anyone who has signed up to speak virtually, as well as from anyone who has joined us today here in the meeting room. When your name is called, if you are joining virtually, please unmute yourself, then please repeat your name for the record and state your topic related to the conduct of court business. You may turn on your camera at this time. The 2-minute timer will then begin. If you're on the Teams meeting and at the same time streaming the meeting on the website, please mute the website stream to avoid feedback. When you have concluded your remarks, you may again turn off your camera and mute your speaker. If you are speaking from the meeting room, please come to the testimony table, repeat your name for the record, and state your topic related to the conduct of court business. Our public comment period will now commence. Thank you again for joining us today.
Wonderful. So we do have some folks signed up to provide public comment, and Clerk Hart will guide us through.
Thank you. Give me just one moment here. Thank you, Madam Commission Vice President. I will alternate between our virtual speakers and our in-room speakers today, and we will begin with the in-room speaker, Andrew Schiffer. And Andrew, if you would repeat your name for the record and state your topic related to the conduct of court business for us, please. And thank you.
Sure. Hello, my name is Andrew Schiffer, and I'm here to give public comment on Agenda Item 10B, 8th Avenue South, Gateway Park North Memorandum of Agreement with City of Seattle. I'm a resident of Georgetown and a member of the Port Community Action Team. The residents of the Georgetown neighborhood of Seattle have been advocating for this space known as Gateway Park North to be transformed into an accessible shoreline park space for over 40 years. This partnership between the port and the city has been built over many years, and this next step forward with the city leading and the port contributing funds for design and permitting is a crucial aspect of this project actually coming to fruition. So we, the community, are in support of this proposal. I want to thank the port for following through with this next step in the process of making an accessible shoreline park in Georgetown a reality, as was originally agreed upon in the Duwamish Valley Community Benefits Commitment. I also want to acknowledge that this is an intermediate step for design and permitting, and that to fulfill its commitment, the port will need to follow through this project all the way to the construction phases currently projected for 2026. I would like to thank the port staff, John Sloan, Daniel Buttsick, and George Blomberg for all their hard work and contributions on this project, as well as the Georgetown Youth Council for continuing to keep the community and the port involved in this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Our next speaker is virtual, and it is Jake Bookwalter. Jake, if you could repeat your name for the record and state your topic related to the conduct of port business, please.
Hello, my name is Jake Bookwalter. I will be speaking on item 10B related to 8th Avenue South funding and a memorandum of agreement with the City of Seattle. I am a lifelong resident of Georgetown, and I've been going to Gateway Park North since I was a kid. Even as a kid, I realized that something wasn't right with the park. It didn't look like other parks that I visited with my family. It, frankly, looked like it hadn't been invested in, and there was never anyone there, which is not right because, as you may know, that is currently Georgetown's only river access, only public green river access, and as such, we deserve sorry, I got sidetracked, apologies. As a community, we deserve river access, and currently, much of the community doesn't know that Gateway Park North exists. With the Georgetown Youth Council, I have organized cleanups at the park, and we have had community come out and they've seen the park and they've acknowledged that it is a beautiful space and that as a community we deserve to have that space for the community and for us to access and recreate on the river. This is a critical next step forward from the Port of Seattle to commit to working with the city, and as such, as a member of the community, I support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Our next in-house speaker is Iris Antman. Iris, please repeat your name for the record and your topic related to the conduct of port business. Thank you. It is, yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Iris Antman, and I'm a member of Seattle Cruise Control, here to speak about the harms of cruise. Cruise ships pollute our waters and air, endanger community health, jeopardize our climate, overwhelm destination communities and infrastructure, and exploit onboard workers. It's time the Port of Seattle acts now to reduce these harms. The world is changing all around us. We are experiencing global warming, resulting in increased wildfires, droughts, flooding, and so much more. And what is the Port of Seattle doing? Promoting more cruises. This is not what is happening across the globe, where citizens and their cities are pushing back. They are saying no. Venice, Italy placed a ban on large cruise ships in 2021. Monterey, California City Council voted to ban cruise ships. Houston, Texas in 2016 stopped welcoming cruise ships into its harbor. Key West, Florida voted in 2022 to allow only one cruise ship per day. Amsterdam City Council has voted to ban cruise ships. Barcelona's regional government last year said it will limit cruise liners arriving at what was once Europe's busiest cruise terminal. In Marseille, one of Europe's biggest cruise ports, more than 52,000 people have signed a petition to ban polluting cruise ships from the city. Bar Harbor, Maine successfully passed citizen initiatives to limit disembarking passengers to 1,000 per day. Charleston, South Carolina ousted repeated environmental offender Carnival, the largest cruise ship company in the world, from using it as a home port. And La Rochelle, France, is reducing cruise ship sailings to meet their climate goals. Cities and citizens are pushing back against the harms of cruise. They are saying no. And what is the Port of Seattle doing? Promoting more cruises. There's something terribly wrong with this picture, and only you can fix it. Please stop promoting more cruises. It's time to cap and reduce cruise sailings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iris. Our next virtual speaker is JC Harris. JC, if you're on the line, please repeat your name for the record and state your topic related to the conduct of port business, please.
My name is J.C. Harris, and the topic is the tax levy. Commissioners, it's with a heavy heart every year I hear the annual discussion of your tax levy. Despite your claims to be the most progressive commission in so many years, in fact, the tax levy is evidence that things are actually getting less equitable for cities like Des Moines. The optics on projects like the wind farm sound fabulous, but for airport communities, they are a distraction. You continue to make more revenue, but the amount coming back to communities like Des Moines actually declines. The tax levy is particularly onerous to Des Moines for two reasons. As you well know, you take the lion's share of that money to pay off your bonds. We literally pay you to expand the airport and increase the noise and pollution. And then the tiny percentage of that levy which provides grants for economic and environment is simply a redistribution of our own money. And much of it is left on the table because there are often not groups to even apply. The biggest mitigation you could make in a stroke of a pen for communities like Des Moines would be either A, simply give us the same deal that you give the city of Sea-Tac, or B, just rebate our share of that tax levy. Okay? Just don't take the money in the first place. First of all, we wouldn't have the insult of punching ourselves in the face with your development. And second of all, it would completely remove the whole Rube Goldberg of administrative costs. The lifeblood of any community like Des Moines is structural revenue, not grants. You can provide that to us, predictability. And last but not least, we know the needs of our community better than you ever will. So one wonders why you just can't stop trying to do that. Please help us with that, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, JC. Our next speaker in-house is Michael Carter. Michael Carter. Okay, we'll come back to Michael. Going back to our virtual list, the speaker is Ian Bright. Ian, if you're on the line, please go ahead and repeat your name for the record and state your topic related to the conduct of port business, please.
Hello, I'm Ian Bright. I'm going to talk about item 10B, 8th Avenue South, or as we call it, Gateway Park North. I'm the co-founder with Jake and the current program coordinator. So I first wanted to re-highlight the importance of having access to water in Georgetown. Since Georgetown is such an industrial area, the importance of green spaces is elevated. The Georgetown Youth Council has been working on Gateway Park North for 4 years, but the community has been working on the park for 40 years. This amount of time shows how important it is to the community. Jake and I have seen hundreds of people spend their weekends cleaning up the park for hours. And I just wanted to say thank you to the port for supporting Gateway Park North. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ian. And calling one last time for Michael Carter. Okay, and no Michael Carter in the room, Madam Commission Vice President.
Thank you, Clerk Hart. That concludes our sign-ups for today. We'll scan the room to see if there's anybody here in person who'd like to provide public comment. And we'll check to see the virtual space if there's anybody online who'd like to provide public comment. Going once, going twice. All right. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to please give a synopsis of any written comments that we have received.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Commission Vice President, members of the Commission, Executive Director Metric. We have received one written comment for today's meeting. This has been previously distributed to you and will become a part of the meeting record here today. The comment comes from Nick Reynolds, who writes in support of item 10B and to express his hope for a positive outcome related to improvements and ongoing work at Gateway Park North, noting that a gathering space would be appreciated by the community for generations to come. And that concludes our written comments received today.
Very good. Hearing no further public testimony, we will move to the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are considered routine and will be adopted by one motion. The items that are removed from the consent agenda will be considered separately immediately after adoption of the remaining consent agenda items. Commissioner Felleman did remove item 8H, so at this time I'm entertaining a motion to approve the consent agenda covering items 8A through G.
So moved.
Thank you. The motion has been moved and seconded by Commissioners Mohammed and Felleman. At this time, Commissioners, please say aye or nay when your name is called for approval of the consent agenda.
Beginning with Commissioner Calkins.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Felleman.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Hosokawa.
Aye.
Thank you. And Commissioner Mohammed.
Aye.
Thank you. 4 ayes, 0 nays for this item.
The motion carries. Thank you. So at this time, Executive Director Metric, will you please introduce item 8H?
Let me go ahead and read that into the record.
Sure.
This is item 8H, authorization for the Executive Director to advertise and execute a construction contract for 2024 Airfields Projects Contract 1 to transfer budget authorization as necessary between the 2024 airfield projects to transfer budget and authorization for Gate B11 Passenger Loading Bridge Civil Foundation from the PLB Phase 3 project to the 2021 through 2025 Airfield Pavement and Supporting Infrastructure Replacement Program, to procure long lead items, to include a project labor agreement for the contract, and to authorize use of port crews for abatement work for a total requested amount of $50,500,000 and a total estimated project cost of $200,300,000.
Commissioners, maintaining our airfield is essential for safe operations of aircraft at our airport. This action replaces distressed airfield pavement, which joint sealant as well as conduct some drainage work on our taxi lanes. We anticipate a federal grant reimbursement of $8 million for 2024 and $50 million over the expected life of the program. So we have a number of presenters here. I'm not sure. So Robert Kakillis, Airport Operations Development Manager, Airfield Operations, and Ise and Guba, Capital Project Manager from Project Management Group. So I guess turn over to Robert first.
Yeah. And I believe we have Paul Shen from our Facilities Infrastructure on the phone, I believe. So.
Yeah, I'm online.
I'd just like to apologize ahead of time for not giving you the heads up beforehand, but thank you for being able to do this on the fly.
We were going to be here anyway, so no worries.
I'm sure that, actually relish the opportunity to present this work. This is great work.
Do you want to go through the presentation or just ask questions or?
Commissioners, there is a short presentation. We can go through those. I think that's a good way to go, and then we can answer questions.
So everything the clerk read into the record is correct. On a high level, just to kind of set the stage. Sea-Tac is a very small footprint, and as cool as it is to build all these new facilities on the airfield, like the IF, North Star, and soon-to-be CCE project, Concourse Expansion, we have a lot of old stuff out there too that needs to be replaced and maintained. So this project is this contract, I should say, because there's more than one capital project, is to replace a whole bunch of old pavement that's out in front of mainly Concourse B for next year, mainly. And in addition to that, replace some of the in-ground infrastructure utilities that are all undersized or over capacity at the same time. Also transfer some authorization from the passenger loading bridge CIP to this project again. The idea being we have a lot of work out there in a very confined footprint, and by bringing them all into one contract, it makes them much more efficient dollar-wise and time-wise, but also a lot less impactful to our passengers and to our airline customers. So the amount of the authorization request is for $50,500,000 for this, for a total estimate of $200,300,000. And if you want to go into more details, Eze is here to keep going through the presentation.
Very good.
Sure. I would continue on the presentation. This is just a few.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Rob mentioned, this is part of our programmatic approach of replacing damaged pavement and supporting infrastructure. Today we're here to ask for the 2024 pavement replacement scope as well as the airfield utility replacement scope. Is worth mentioning that the pavement replacement scope is the year 4 of a 5-year program that's began in 2021 and will be concluded in 2025. We are also receiving grant for a portion of the scope, so all the work that will be performed will be grant eligible. We're slated to receive $8 million. The work is currently scheduled to be advertised in, next month, and we are planning to be done with the work by the end of 2024 in December. The first part of this project, as I mentioned, is the pavement and supporting infrastructure, which focuses on replacing distressed pavement. 2024 scope will be focusing on Taxi Lane Whiskey, which is just located west of Concourse B, and we're also going to be replacing the apron associated with that terminal. And next slide, please. And the airfield utility improvement project focuses on replacing distressed utilities as well as upgrading those utilities to meet our projected growth. And we are going to be combining both projects into one construction package and, to take advantage of the to reduce the impacts to the airport operation. Next slide, please. So on this exhibit, you can see the general location of the work. As I mentioned, the taxi lane whiskey, there you see in the big rectangle, is just west of the Concourse B and Central Terminal, but we're also going to be replacing the apron areas that are adjacent to the building. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, construction is scheduled to take place in 2024 second quarter, and we are planning to be done with the work by the end of 2024. Next slide, please. So the two programs that I just covered, the 2021 to 2025 airfield pavement and supporting infrastructure piece, the amount we're asking for under this contract is for year 4, which is $32,620,000 of the $160 million program budget. And then the second portion of the project is the airfield utility improvement, and we are requesting $17,880,000 of the $40,272,000 project cost, for a combined of $50,500,000, and the total program cost is $200,300,000.
Thank you very much. Perfect. So, Commissioners, the item before us is requesting authorization for the Executive Director to advertise and execute a construction contract for the 2024 Airfield Projects Contract 1 to transfer budget, and authorization is necessary between the 2024 Airfield Projects to transfer budget authorization for Gate B11 Passenger Loading Bridge PLB Civil Foundation from the PLB Phase 3 project to the 2021 to 2025 Airfield Pavement and Supporting Infrastructure Replacement Program, to procure long lead items, to include a project labor agreement for the contract, and to authorize use of port crews for abatement work for a total requested amount of $50,500,000 and a total estimated project cost of $200,300,000. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Are there any questions or comments for staff at this time? Commissioner Calkins.
So if we go back to slide 6. That has got to be some of the busiest real estate on our ramp. So how do we do this while we've got planes and trucks and everybody taxiing around this, and still stay on that 6-month timeline?
That's a really good question. So a lot of planning has conducted a very robust, we developed a very robust communication plan, and for almost a year and a half we've been executing that plan, which includes lots of coordination with airlines, operations. We conducted a safety risk management panel, which involves the FAA, tower, but to make it simple, we've developed all this work into 9 construction phases, and each phase will be closing approximately 2 to 3 gates per phase, to reduce the impact that way. And also, based on feedback we received from the stakeholders, we've also phased the work so that most impactful portion of the work, which is that taxi lane whiskey, will be fully restored during the summer peak season for 3 months. So for 6 weeks, we're now going to be working on the taxi lane reconstruction. During that period, we'll be focusing on the apron areas adjacent to the terminal. So lots of coordination. We've met with different stakeholders on a bi-weekly basis to make sure that we are getting inputs from all the stakeholders.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fellman?
Thanks again for the presentation on such short notice. I just saw in the, I guess it's in the appendix, the last page of the presentation, where you talk about risks and mitigations, and so this is a huge project that's under a project labor agreement, but you're putting as a probability or an impact of medium associated with labor and supplier agreement negotiations that might impact construction if there's a strike? So we're talking about the strike being with the suppliers, not with us. That's what we're talking. And do you
Yes,
have
Commissioner.
reason to believe there's a concern about this?
Well, we're planning to include a project labor agreement to help mitigate that risk, but we're also, as far as the long lead items, we're planning to procure those materials ahead of time, the long lead items.
So
perhaps
I'm
I
just
missed
clarifying
your
that
You're risking strike.
Oh, no, not at the moment. Based on all the labor contracts that are going to be expiring, we think the risk is medium to low.
All right. So again, just the clarity that's between the supplier and them, not between. It would be kind of hard to believe that if we have a PLA, that we'd be concerned about strikes. It's between the supplier and the contractor,
Yes.
right? And then the only other thing was the 8% DBE goal, right? And that was determined based on what we think is available for such a big job.
That's correct. The DBE goal was established by our diversity and contracting office at 8%, and it's based on the work that the type of work and the DBE availability analysis that was performed. That's how the goal was established.
I thank you, and I wish you the best of luck in the scheduling of this greatly challenging and expensive project. But thanks again for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
All right, seeing no further questions or comments, commissioners, please say aye or nay when your name is called.
Thank you. Beginning with Commissioner Calkins.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Fellman.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Hasakawa.
Aye.
Thank you, and Commissioner Mohammed. Thank you. 4 ayes, 0 nays for this item.
Thank you, Clerk Hart, and thank you, staff, for presenting.
And the
We
motion
have
passes for the record.
the motion passes. We have 2 additional items today listed under new business. Clerk Hart, please read the first item into the record, and Executive Director Metrick will introduce the item.
Thank you, Commission Vice President. This is Agenda Item 10A, authorization for the Executive Director to enter into a memorandum of agreement with King County to join the Coalition for Climate Careers in the amount of $100,000.
Commissioners, while I have the authority to sign this memorandum of agreement under the new delegation of authority, we are bringing it forward to the Commission in public session since the Commission has directed the Port to implement a Green Careers Workforce Development Strategy through Resolution 3776. This action provides seed funding for a new collaborative that will bring together public and private organizations as well as frontline communities to develop a regional approach to green jobs. We're excited to support this innovative new effort to help break down regional silos for green job creation. We believe that this effort will be a great complement to our existing port-specific programs. The presenter this afternoon is Tiffany Sevilla. Tiffany.
Thank you, Executive Director and Port of Seattle Commissioners, for carrying out this invitation today. As the Executive Director said, I'm speaking about a proposed memorandum of agreement with King County for the Port to join the Coalition for Climate Careers. Next slide, please. I'll start by talking about how we got here. So this builds upon a long history of the Port of Seattle Commission and other regional government agencies emphasizing the importance of green jobs workforce development collaboration throughout our region. In June of 2020, in the Workforce Development Policy Directive, the Port of Seattle Commission directed the Port to implement strategies for green careers workforce development and continues to urge us to break down silos, which led us in 2021 to begin meeting with our counterparts at King County and the City of Seattle, who have also been ramping up their green jobs workforce development priorities. And we started meeting monthly to talk about our shared priorities. Then last year, if you'll remember, we worked with the Seattle Jobs Initiative to publish a Maritime and Green Careers Pathways report which identified some of the top green career pathways in port-related industries. That included electricians and HVAC installers, among other clean energy construction trades careers. And then at the end of last year, recognizing the importance of working together collaboratively with different stakeholders, Commission approved a memorandum of agreement with King County to share the cost of a FUSE executive fellow who would help coordinate a regional green jobs coalition. At the beginning of this year, King County published their own green jobs strategy with goals for the next 2 years, which included supporting this regional green jobs coalition. And then in April of this year, a small steering committee put together to figure out what this regional coalition could look like started to meet. So who was part of that steering committee? Next slide, please. I want to emphasize that this was a small but mighty task force of representatives from different workforce development stakeholders. It's not representative of what the entire coalition will be. It'll be a much broader coalition. This was just a group of dedicated professionals who came together to figure out the vision for this regional coalition, figure out the framework. So there were 16 of us, including government agencies, industry employers, labor unions, and educational institutions, who were tasked with figuring out a governance structure and financial framework for this coalition. Representatives from each of the government agencies were at the staff level. I represented the Port of Seattle. And other organizations that were represented included the White Center Community Development Association and the IBEW Local 46 Electricians Union. Next slide, please. I want to emphasize that this coalition, or this small steering committee, or this task force, came together and determined that this coalition is necessary beyond what other organizations like the Workforce Development Council of Seattle King County can do. The scope extends beyond that to include one day multiple counties, so not just King County, but Pierce, Snohomish, and Kitsap County, as well as not being restricted by WIOA federal restrictions on how to use funding the way WDC is. And in fact, a representative from the WDC participated in this steering committee. And what this steering committee came up with is what we're calling the Coalition for Climate Careers, or C3. And the mission statement, as can be seen here, is to be a strategic collaboration among public and private organizations and frontline communities dedicated to establishing an inclusive and prosperous green workforce in King County. And I want to emphasize, as the executive director mentioned, this is in alignment with our existing green careers priorities. The careers that we're talking about here are inclusive of port-related industries like aviation and maritime and construction. And so some of the goals, if we go to the next slide, for this coalition include focuses on funding, coalition building, community engagement, workforce development, and development and research around the green economy. Really positioning ourselves to be leaders across the region in developing a green workforce. If we go to the next slide, coalition members, as I said, are going to be much broader than the organizations who participated in figuring out what this might look like. It'll be open to the general public, so community members, as well as organizations, including the many stakeholders identified here: workforce development, labor unions, community-based organizations, educational institutions, employers, and local government. If we go to the next slide, there is a 7-page governance document that details what the structure of this coalition will look like. But just a high-level overview is that it will be led by an executive steering committee that will set funding priorities and make sure the coalition aligns with its stated goals. The Executive Steering Committee will include a seat for the Port of Seattle and will direct a contracted consultant to be a coordinator to execute coalition priorities. I'll go into the scope of work for this coordinator in a couple moments. Additionally, the steering committee determined that in order to be nimble enough to respond to current emerging funding opportunities related to green jobs, rather than setting this up as a 501c3 right now, which takes quite a bit of time, one of the first tasks of this coalition is going to be identifying a fiscal sponsor, so an existing 501c3 that will be responsible for managing funds. Next slide, please. So why should the Port join this? As I referenced the Port of Seattle Workforce Development Policy Directive earlier, we are tasked with fostering partnership with the many stakeholders identified here, community-based organizations, labor, industry, to maximize the workforce development impact of the Port of Seattle. So it's natural and I think important that we participate in this kind of coalition. Additionally, those funding opportunities I mentioned, such as the Inflation Reduction Act and the different federal and state funding opportunities for green jobs, many of these require collaboration and partnerships in order to be competitive. So for our region to be able to access these opportunities, we have to form these partnerships now. Next slide, please. So what this looks like for the Port right now is a $100,000 contribution paid by the Port to King County out of the workforce development budget as part of the shared cost of this contracted facilitator who will carry out the coalition's priorities. The funding strategy of C3 is still in development. It does include securing one-time seed funding from the Port, as well as other local government agencies, and eventually will include both public and private funding sources. Next slide, please. The full scope of work for the contracted coordinator is attached to the memorandum of agreement, but broadly, the overarching tasks of the coordinator are leadership and governance, communication, promotion of the coalition, and managing the coalition's resources. And that concludes my presentation on the Coalition for Climate Careers, and I welcome your questions at this time.
Very good. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for the presentation. Commissioners, do you have questions at this time? Commissioner Feldman.
Thanks so much for that. It's really great to see us finding new opportunities to build on the green job initiatives, and thank you for finding that and leveraging the Climate Commitment Act, IJA and other sources. There was that whole green, I forget, the climate core sounds like a great idea. So, and C3s and K4, we have this whole coalition of acronyms. But what I don't see is what is the total budget and what are the other agencies who are contributing? So this is right now just paying for a consultant. Are there other known expenses? So it just like, what is the Port of Seattle's $100,000 in the bigger mix?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Feldman. I can't speak right now on the commitments of the other government agencies who are being asked for seed funding. Their contributions are likely to come out of their budget for next year, and part of why I'm making this proposal now is that we have the funding for it this year. However, I do expect it to be a similar significant contribution, and there's also a report that I'll be able to provide next week that has more details about how the funding strategy for C3 is being put together. But it will include not just public government agency funding, but also private contributions as well.
Thanks for that. I just sometimes like to see, like, you make it like a challenge grant. This money is available contingent on a match or something like that, just to leverage other participation. But it seems like a great investment for the Port.
Commissioner Mohammed.
Well, I'm just glad to see that we are participating as a region to respond to this, and the fact that we're coming to the table with the county and other agencies. That coordinated response is what is needed when we're talking about creating pathways to green jobs, and so I just want to commend you guys for doing that. And I think it's just strategic to look at underspend and come to the table quickly by allocating some dollars to that. I appreciate Commissioner Fellman asking what the other agencies are paying. I think that is important. And if we are contributing more, I would say I hope that we'll be able to have a say in some of the outcomes that we're looking forward to seeing. But again, just gratitude on the work that you guys are doing.
I guess my questions are, I see that within the scope of work, this group will make budgetary recommendations for coalition spending. To whom do they make recommendations? And what's the feedback loop to the Port of Seattle?
So the Port of Seattle, being part of the Executive Steering Committee, will help set direction for how the coalition spends the funding it receives. And recommendations will be made, recommendations will be made by the contracted coordinator to the coalition, the broader coalition, and that includes a diversity of entities.
And for what we're authorizing now is to share in the cost of a consultant, but after the consultant does their work within the scope of this agreement and identify priorities and needs, and then makes recommendations for coalition spending, where does that money come from?
That's a great question, Commissioner. And the funding strategy is still to be developed. Partly by that consultant. A lot of the work that has been done so far by the task force has just been to figure out what would the framework for this coalition be, but the full funding strategy is still in development.
Is there another public partner besides King County as a part of this coalition?
Yes, the City of Seattle has been part of the development of this as well.
And I can assume that they're also contributing financially.
They will be asked to.
They'll be asked.
Yes.
So given the work that the Port of Seattle has done in career pathways and developing green jobs and organizations and, the summits that we facilitate to break down those silos among partners and shared lessons learned and strategies in order to be successful, will they, as major players within the Port of Seattle towards developing pathways to green jobs, will they be involved also in this effort?
Yes.
As
yes,
members?
Definitely. In the coalition, yes.
I hear a lot from community members, including from, one existing institutional community-based work group that we have called PCAT about this concept of volunteer fatigue. So what makes this special that King County is asking us to contribute $100,000 instead of reinventing the wheel and putting extra workload on our existing program participants?
This is, thank you for that question, Commissioner. I think if I understand correctly, some of the question is about when people are asked to provide input into this kind of work, they're often asked to do it on a voluntary basis. And that is a concern that's been brought up by our steering committee. And there is expectation in the full governance document that coalition members, or that funding will be available for coalition members to be compensated for their time when they're members of community, so not staff like myself participating as part of my work.
Okay. And for a follow-up question?
No, I see.
Is there somebody else who'd like to come and present?
Yeah, I would love
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The perfect time for that would have been during public comment. No. I appreciate it. So we'll thank you for that. Please do feel feel free to write in and formally submit public comment. So I guess my other question is about that's okay. Thank you. That's very informative. Has NWSA, given their work in the maritime space, considered to be a part of this, or help think tank around careers and pathways towards green jobs?
I would love to include NWSA as part of the coalition. We haven't spoken to them about it yet. But also, this is brand new, and I guess I should emphasize that this would be the port's opportunity to position us as a leader in supporting this work.
We have our equity index, right? And we have strategies to make sure that we are doing specific targeted engagement in historically marginalized but also disparately impacted communities for climate resilience, for environmentalism. How does this center our goals around our triple bottom line, which is not just promoting economic opportunities and not just promoting a better quality of life and healthy environment, but also advancing racial equity?
For me, I think having the opportunity to be on the executive steering committee and to make recommendations and bring along our community partners, in particular the community-based organizations that the port already works so closely with, and shine a light on like our partners in South King County and throughout South Seattle. That's how we can leverage our position in being part of this work.
And how will this work center communities of color?
Communities of color are explicitly written into the vision for this coalition, and having communities of color and community-based organizations participate in the broader coalition and making sure that they are compensated for their participation, and making sure they have access to funding and resources as part of this coalition is all part of the broader goals.
And what division or office within King County will be overseeing this task force?
So the task force I've talked about so far has been operating this year, but going forward, the coalition isn't something that would be necessarily overseen by King County. Our contribution would be made to King County right now so that they would be able to pull together contributions from, well, their own contribution and potential other government agency contributions to procure a consultant coordinator for the first couple years' work of the coalition. So that's the support King County would be providing, but this coalition would be a separate entity.
But they don't have a continued commitment to actually fund or resource the work of this blooming task force.
They would have this agreement with us, and they would also be participating in the executive steering committee.
I wish I had additional information about the steering committee and its scope of work beyond the scope of work for the coordinator itself, so that I knew what its goals and outcomes were. To me, it's just still not clear, and how we're expecting to contribute and what that means for long-term gains. I'm concerned about volunteer fatigue. We've just heard it so much. And $100,000, I'll be voting to approve this, but because it's worth the investment. But I'm gonna ask that you provide additional information about the actual scope of work for this task force, including a feedback loop and their plan for continued funding for implementation. So with that, do I have any other questions or comments from commissioners? Clerk Hart, please. No, I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second from Commissioner Muhammad. Commissioner Fellman, Clerk Hart, please call the roll, and Commissioner say aye or nay when your name is called.
Commissioners, if I may just add one comment. Luis Navarro, Director of Workforce Development, and I just want to say those were very good questions. There are two places that we come back to you with detailed information. One is our annual report to Commission on the investments in workforce development, the results, and how that money is benefiting communities, in particular BIPOC communities, immigrant and refugee communities. So we come to you in the first quarter with a detailed report every year as we are required. For this particular effort, there is another parallel that we currently operate under, and that's in the construction arena. We have a regional public owners collaboration where we bring the Port of Seattle's equity, ideas and goals and aspirations, and our voice is important in that construction-related process. This will be similar, but your questions for more information are important, and we'll be providing those as necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There is a motion and a second on the floor for the vote, beginning with Commissioner Calkins.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Felleman.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Hasagawa.
Aye.
Thank you, and Commissioner Mohammed.
Aye.
Thank you. 4 ayes, 0 nays for this item.
The motion carries. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you,
Thank
Commissioners.
you, Luis. All right, moving on to the next item. I understand Commissioner Mohammed needs to recuse herself for agenda item 10B. Is that correct, Commissioner Mohammed?
Yes, thank you. Members of the commission, I would like to recuse myself from item 10B due to a potential conflict of interest or a potential appearance of conflict of interest. This item addresses an agreement between the Port of Seattle and the City of Seattle. Since I'm an employee of the City of Seattle, and after consulting with Commission counsel and out of abundance of caution, I would like to recuse myself at this time from considering this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Please go ahead and leave the meeting at this time and do not rejoin until staff lets you know the item has concluded. And Clerk Hart, please read the next item into the record in just a moment. And then Executive Director Metrick will introduce it.
Thank you. This is agenda item 10B, authorization for the executive director to sign a memorandum of agreement with the City of Seattle enabling the port to provide funding up to $500,000 and approximately $50,000 in-kind support for site characterization, design, and permitting of the 8th Avenue South Gateway Park North project, and to authorize funding in the amount of $317,128 to support city-led site characterization, design, and permitting tasks for a total estimated project cost of $2,600,000.
Commissioners, similar to the last item, while I have authority to sign this memorandum of agreement under the new delegation of authority, we're bringing it forward to you today since it fulfills a requirement of the Duwamish Valley Community Benefits Commitment. This project location was identified as an action area to improve public parks and green space under the Healthy Environment and Communities goal within the policy directive. The members of the community have prioritized this project. I'm very pleased to bring it forward to you for your consideration today. We have numbers of presenters here. We have Sarah Auger, Director of Maritime Environment Sustainability. I see John Sloan there. He's listed here. John Sloan, Senior Manager for Environmental Programs. Danielle Butzik, Environmental Program Manager. And Julie Ewan, Manager, Waterfront Capital Projects. So with that, I believe I'm turning over to you, Sarah.
Yes. Thank you, Executive Director. Yes, today we're going to talk with you about the 8th Avenue South and Gateway Park North site. Really excited to share with you this proposal. This site has been an informal public river access for decades. Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Maybe I need to be a little closer.
I need bigger ears.
How's this?
That's
all right. I'll lean in. So today we're going to talk about the 8th Avenue South and Gateway Park North. I'm pleased to be here. This site has been an informal public river access site for decades. The Georgetown community has been organizing and advocating for this site to become a public park for decades. The City of Seattle has now allocated $1.75 million towards access improvements in the 8th Avenue South corridor, enabling this Park project to proceed. And in 2019, as part of the Duwamish Valley Community Benefits Agreement, the Port of Seattle committed to help the community achieve their vision for a park in this location. The port initially began to plan a bankline stabilization project at the site, but it soon became clear that it would be more effective for the port to partner with the City of Seattle and contribute to the city's project financially and with our staff expertise. Thus, today we have before the Commission a request that has two elements. First is a request for approval for the Executive Director to sign a memorandum of agreement with the City of Seattle to formalize the partnership and provide a mechanism for transferring funds to the city to support a portion of the project work. And secondly, is a request to authorize a specific expenditure of port funds for design and permitting of the project. This project is very important to the Duwamish Valley community. It's identified, as I mentioned, it's been identified by the Port Community Action Team, or PCAT, as a priority. And again, it's part of our formal set of commitments in the Duwamish Valley Community Benefits Agreement. I'm going to now hand it over to Danielle Butzik, our Environmental Program Manager, to provide a more detailed presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. My name is Danielle Butzik. I am, as Sarah said, an Environmental Program Manager in our Maritime Environment Sustainability Department. I'm very, very excited to be here sharing this proposal with you. This has been a long time coming, and it's a really important step for the community in getting something that they've been working on for a really long time. You can go to the next slide, please. Just some initial context. Sarah provided a little bit in her opening remarks. This is a site that is the Georgetown community's only river access. They've really been actively advocating for this to be a public park for over 40 years. A portion of the site is owned by Seattle Parks and Recreation. It actually has landmark status due to the pump house's association with the historic the Georgetown steam plant. It was transferred to Parks and Recreation in 2010 from Seattle City Light as part of that landmarking process. So the port initially authorized funding for the bankline stabilization project, which was intended to kind of kickstart this park development project that the community had been advocating for so long. But really throughout the course of partnering with the city, it became clear that a better strategy would be for us to support the city's design process rather than going at on parallel tracks. So that approach we really found would reduce permitting redundancies and would enable the designs to really be integrated. So as Sarah said, this is actually two separate requests. This is one is for the signature, the executive director to sign the memorandum of agreement, and the other is a funding authorization request for funding for design and permitting. So you will notice that the timeline that we've provided in the memo is it puts the completion date at about 2028, the end of 2028 to be specific, and there's considerable time allowed for permitting. This is because this project is likely to be pretty complex as far as permitting because it is in water, as well as there will be significant public involvement in the design. And it is really complex with the various different ownership and properties on site. We do think that the initial schedule is reflecting that the permitting will be completed in the third quarter of 2026, and construction will be complete by Q4 of 2028. And that is dependent on the city's resourcing and scheduling as well. So to cover this slide, the MOA, the Memorandum of Agreement, is it commits us to providing $500,000, up to $500,000 for design and permitting support. The city will invoice us for actual costs, and then it also provides in-kind support in the form of staff expertise in permitting and design, habitat design. And potentially habitat materials and potential use of our Duwamish Valley Community Hub for meeting spaces. The project is as Sarah mentioned, the project, or maybe it was Executive Director Metric mentioned, this project is called out in the Duwamish Valley Community Benefits Commitment in Section 5, Public Parks and Open and Green Space. So it is something that we've been talking about for a long time. It's something that the community has been really advocating for the port to support for a long time. So this is just a really exciting process for us to be kicking off. And I'll turn it over to Julie for a couple minutes to talk about the funding request.
Thanks, Danielle. Good afternoon. My name is Julie Yoon, Capital Project Manager. Like Sarah and Danielle said, I just wanted to elaborate on the fact that going hand in hand with the MOA approval request, we're also coming here with a request for design authorization and funding in the amount of $317,128, as you see in the slide there, which brings the current authorization to date to $550,000. And as Danielle said, that will allow the Port of Seattle team to be able to provide the contribution of funds as well as in-kind staff support throughout design and permitting in collaboration with the City of Seattle. And looking ahead, I just wanted to give heads up as well that at the completion of the permitting and design, the team does anticipate returning to commission with a similarly kind of coupled request that'll include the construction MOA as well as a construction authorization at that time in the amount of around $2,050,000. I'll hand it back over to you.
You can go to the next slide now. So this slide is really just to orient you to the project site. As you can see, these red lines, those are the property boundaries. There are 4 separate properties on or adjacent to this project site, which makes it really complicated. There's a right-of-way, a city right-of-way site that is owned by Seattle Department of Transportation, City Parks property, and then a portion of the property is within the former Commercial Waterway District number 1, and then to the in where the number 2 is, that site is the Crowley parcel, which is currently an ecology mandated cleanup. So there are a lot of different moving parts here on this site, and where you can see the red circle where it says project site, that's kind of the heart of the site, but ideally the whole that whole corridor will eventually be improved, where you see the 4 indicating the 8th Avenue South corridor, as well as the whole waterfront section of this property. Next slide, please. And this slide is to orient you to the community's vision for the site. So this is the concept that was presented to the community by the city and their design team in 2022. This design was developed collaboratively with many community members and a really and a community-oriented design firm. The design was funded by a Department of Neighborhoods grant awarded by the city and managed by the Seattle Parks Foundation. They were the fiscal sponsor for the grant. The design was transferred to the city when the city allocated $1.7 million for the corridor improvements on the 8th Avenue South Street corridor. This is the concept from which the design is going to start. And since there has been funding for the corridor improvements along 8th Avenue South, the yellow box or hashed marks indicate what was initially thought to be the potential phase 1 area, which would be the bank line stabilization or restoration project. But now that there is funding for that corridor, there are going to be some early stormwater improvements and access improvements to that corridor. So really, the 8th Avenue South section of the site is the phase 1. Next slide, please. So the scope for the city includes really leading the site characterization, the design, and the contract for design, as well as the permitting tasks. So the city will be the lead on the project. They will be the applicant for any permits. They're going to be leading any outreach with the community. And they'll also be, as I said, managing any contracts for the design. And the port, you can go to the next slide because the next one is going to detail our role. The port is going to be a partner in this. We will provide support. We will provide funding and in-kind support in the form of materials and staff expertise. But we will not be leading this project. It will be, we will be just really playing a supporting role. As Julie mentioned, we're anticipating that there will be a future request for construction support. We expect that to be a separate memorandum of agreement or an addendum to or amendment to this MOA. So the construction funding, construction work is not included in this current authorization. But we do expect that to happen sometime in 2026 or so when permitting and design have been completed. And next slide. And I will let Julie talk to the design authorization component.
So this is just another slide to distinguish the second request on this agenda item for design authorization and funding. No new information, but again, in support of the MOA, the team is requesting design authorization and funding, again, in the amount of $317,128. That'll bring the total authorization up to $550,000 out of an estimated total project cost of $2.6 million. And as we've been, as has been described in the previous slides, that'll allow for the port to be able to provide the in-kind staff support as well as contribution of funds to the City of Seattle throughout the design and permitting phase, leading up to the next time we return to commission for the next construction phase.
Next slide. That concludes our presentation.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments? Commissioner Calkins.
Thank you for the presentation. That was wonderful to hear the description. When reading through the materials ahead of time, I was reflecting on, well, Andrew, thank you for coming to present. I don't think we've seen each other in person since pre-COVID, but I'm really impressed with the dogged advocacy of Georgetown community members, participants in PCAT and others. And this is one of those instances where, you know, when the community speaks, we have to listen. And this has been a real priority. And so I'm grateful that the City of Seattle is taking this project on and that we get to partner with them as they lead this project. The other thought I had was, this is probably 3 months ago now, but there was an article about how even sort of postage stamp size reintroduction of natural spaces can have a huge benefit to the ecology of an area. And as somebody who worked in Georgetown for 12 years, it always felt like that was something in dire need. I remember at one point we purchased just a set of bikes that anybody in our business could use to go around and get food for lunch or just, you know, ride somewhere to sit and have a picnic. And they just didn't get that used that much because at 6th and Michigan, where we were located, it was hard to find good green space. And this would be easily bikeable for those folks. So nice place to sit on the waterfront and watch herons fly in and have your sandwich. So I'm glad we can help support the City of Seattle in this, and I look forward to the future requests for the construction when we get to that phase. Thanks.
Commissioner Feldman.
It's always wonderful to see concrete turned into greenery. That's a beautiful thing. And I guess I had a couple questions. This piecemeal land ownership is pretty crazy, but we have no dirt in the game, right? We're helping beautify other people's land, right?
We're doing this work as part of our commitment under the Duwamish River or Duwamish Valley Community
I know,
Benefits.
but we have no ownership in the land, right?
I might be able to provide clarification to your question. There is some commercial waterway district property involved, which the port has a limited interest in as a successor, but it's not true property ownership.
Yeah, I was wondering about how you were going to answer that question, but yeah.
Good answer.
So thank you for that. But the fact of the matter is, so this is going to include shoreline restoration as well, right? And so what I would have loved to see, and I'm sure we'll get to see in the future, it's, you know, as Commissioner Calkins talked about postage stamps, the fact is that there's a bunch of postage stamps along the river, and to see the proximity of this to the others where refugia can be created along the route of a migratory fish, it would be just kind of fun to see how the string of pearls continue to, both in terms of for the park space for the community as well as for the migratory species using it. I think that would be a really nice enhancement. The only other thing is, again, the overall budget, how much is the Port of Seattle? We're not putting property in the game, but we're being asked to do design and development. Is there an estimate of, you know, like you said, Department of Neighborhoods gave a grant to do this initial design. How big was that?
I'm actually not aware of the size of that grant. I don't think that it was significant. It was, it, you know, helped get to conceptual design, but the city has additional funding allocated for to further the design beyond concept. We know that the initial budget for the city is about 15 million to 20 million. That's really rough. That's in this conceptual phase. They'll refine that as they move through design and permitting.
All right, so that's the ballpark estimated total project.
Correct.
And so we're being asked right now this authorization of up to what, 550?
Correct.
And that, but the assumption that we're likely to be come back to ask something around 2 million in the future?
That's, yes,
of,
that's correct.
Of a 15 million somewhat. All right, just to get a scope of work. And so, but the only other folks that have actual financial skin in the game would be the city?
Correct, yes. Yes, at this point.
All right, the last thing, when you say Crowley property, I mean, you're saying it's a remediation site, but does Crowley still own it?
I am not sure who the current owner of that property is. It was, the Crowley site is when, that's who owned it when Ecology designated as a cleanup site. I don't know who the current owner of that property is.
But typically whoever owned it still owns the pollution.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah,
yes.
so I mean,
yes,
I'm just wondering
yes.
in terms of when you see a private piece of land in addition to the smorgasbord of all this public land,
Yeah.
it seems to be.
Yeah, and to be clear, the Crowley site is not part of the site that's proposed for the park development. It's adjacent to, just a kind of a fact to consider, that there's a cleanup site adjacent to this
Thank you
park
for that
development.
clarification.
So I guess I'm wondering, can you describe what the engagement with PCAT has been around this to date? And given that the city of Seattle is really leading on this and the Port of Seattle is supporting this effort, what will the continued engagement and feedback loop be with PCAT, which is the port stakeholder group for the area?
Yeah, so as you know, this site is a PCAP priority. They've communicated that this particular project is one of their priorities for this year. Up until early this year, there was a, or maybe it was late last year, we were meeting monthly with the community on the design as this design was developed, and that was actually led by the port. We facilitated that effort because we were in the midst of scoping and working on our bankline stabilization project, and it really just became clear that we needed to have better coordination with the city and with the community and make sure that everybody was on the same page. And so we met monthly, and we've been really, really engaged. The PCAT has been super engaged, and Georgetown Youth Council has been really involved in this as well. And So there was a lot of coordination, and then when we kind of decided to move in a different direction, and the port was we were no longer pursuing that bank line stabilization work, and moved into kind of a partnership role with the city. There were a lot of things that needed to happen on the city's side, as far as getting a contractor and figuring out how they were going to scope the project and get funding. So it kind of it slowed down a bit. There was still coordination on the city's end, like substantial coordination that the city was doing, working with businesses on not only this project, but just on just a lot of kind of improvement work that they're working on in the Georgetown area with just enhancing the environment for the community members there. Particularly this 8th Avenue South corridor, though.
So I had requested in the budget an assessment of Duwamish Valley Parks, which Commissioner Fellman was kind enough to second, and I'm wondering, is this park still going to be considered an assessment of Duwamish Valley?
I believe the assessment of Duwamish Valley Parks were Port of Seattle parks, so as such, this would not be included. It's not currently, it's not one of our parks.
Yeah, great, perfect. Okay. Commissioner Fellman.
Again, I think it's useful to see where those other parks are. You know, whether it's our property or not, the community has access due to this proximity. And like when we start thinking about other street ends or whatever, how they are spaced relative to the other, and we're going to invest in habitat restoration. So while it may not be part of our assessment, it's still part of the community and ecological asset. It would be just good to, and you know, the best property is adjacent to somebody else's property that is useful, right? So thank you for that.
Yeah, I like to see the Port of Seattle maximizing its footprint of influence when it comes to environmental justice, particularly for beloved communities like Georgetown and South Park. Seeing no further questions or comments, Commissioners, do I have a motion in a second?
So moved.
Second?
The motion has been made and seconded by Commissioners Calkins and Fellman. Clerk Hart, please call the roll, and Commissioners, say aye or nay when your name is called.
Thank you. Beginning with Commissioner Calkins.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Fellman.
Aye.
Thank you. And Commissioner Hasagawa.
Aye.
Thank you. 3 ayes, 0 nays for this item.
Thank you. The motion passes. So let's take a moment to let Commissioner Mohammed know that we're ready for her to rejoin.
I've just sent that request.
Okay. So as Commissioner Mohammed rejoins the meeting, we will move to item number 11, presentations and staff reports. Clerk Hart, please read the next item into the record, and then Executive Director Metrick will then introduce it.
Thank you. This is agenda item 11A, the tax levy draft plan of finance for the 2024-2028. I'm sorry, for 2024-2028, and it's a briefing.
Commissioners, I can wait. Should I wait for Commissioner Mohammed?
I would say go ahead and proceed.
Commissioners, over the past several months, you have engaged in a thoughtful, strategic review of our spending priorities for the 2024 budget. Key to implementing your vision for those investments is how we pay for them. The draft plan of finance looks at a mix of revenue sources, including our operating income and the port's property tax authority. In developing this proposed plan of finance, we have been focused on financial responsibility and sustainability of our organization. In particular, we're about to spend an average of $1 billion a year for the next 5 years and planning to make major investments in environmental cleanup as well. This year, in order to prepare for those major expenditures, we are aligning our financing strategies to ensure that we strike a balance between our current capacity and the uncertain fiscal outlook ahead. We are also very sensitive to the impact on the King County taxpayer. There are a number of substantive aspects of today's presentation, but I want to highlight our staff proposal to increase the port's property tax levy by 4.8%. This increase meets those criteria that are laid out above and provides an additional $4 million in levy cash in 2024. I know that commissioners will be considering policies at future meetings to ensure that these additional revenues are targeted to fund our environmental responsibilities, which I strongly support. I also want to highlight that under this plan, the levy increase is only expected to increase in a $10 per year increase to the median homeowner in King County. I look forward to hearing your feedback during today's discussion. So finally, I want to mention that the full proposed budget will be released this Thursday with a press release and an interactive website. We look forward to your first reading of our proposed budget at your next meeting in November. So the presenters this afternoon, I'm going to kick us off and go over a few slides, and then I'll hand it over to Elizabeth Morrison, Director of Corporate Finance, and Scott Bertram, Manager of Corporate Finance. So can we go to the slideshow, please? Next slide, please. Commissioners, here's just the items we're going to walk through. I'm going to touch real quickly on the budget process timeline. I've already talked about the bottom line up front a little bit, but I'll go over that in detail. Then we'll have the tax levy background and update. Well, Elizabeth will go through that, and then we'll go into the draft plan of finance for 2024 to 2028, and we'll look beyond beyond 2028, and then we'll finalize our recommendation for the tax levy, and then of course we'll look at other finance initiatives, and then there's some appendix in your materials. There's this appendix with additional information. So next slide, please. Commissioners, there we are. You're well familiar with this of the next where we are in this process, but here we are at the plan of finance and tax levy briefing, and next will be the first reading and public hearing for the 2024 budget on November 14th, with the final reading and final passage on the 21st of November. Next slide, please. So the bottom line up front, these came out of, the bottom line up front is that we're going to implement the recommendations that came out of the June and July budget retreats and the discussions that we had with you. We'll continue to steward resources to prepare for the future, to meet our growing operational and regional needs, with a continued focus on environmental remediation and potential economic uncertainty that's out there, and this includes global developments as well that may have introduced uncertainty into our economic world going forward. We'll consider beginning to earmark funds to pay for the port's environmental responsibilities. Again, that's something that I support, that we're in discussions with the Commission on that. And then our annual levy proposed at 75% of the port's maximum allowable levy, something we discussed before with you. And so the 2024 tax levy of 80 will be $86.7 million. It represents a 4.8% increase from 2023 and provides an additional $4 million in levy cash in 2024. Next slide, please. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Morrison to walk through the rest of the presentation. Elizabeth.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'll begin with the tax levy and then ask Scott Bertram to present the draft plan of finance. We'll begin with some background. The port can assess a levy on property within King County per state law, and the levy is approved each year by the Commission. The Commission approves an amount of the levy, and that amount can be anything up to the statutory maximum. For 2024, that maximum amount is just over $115 million. The levy can also be leveraged by issuing general obligation bonds, which are then paid for from the tax levy. All of the port's existing general obligation bonds have been used for non-airport infrastructure, specifically for the SR 99 tunnel and for container terminals operated by the Northwest Seaport Alliance and Fisherman's Terminal. The debt service on those bonds is the first claim on the annual tax levy. In addition, the port uses the tax levy to pay for its environmental liabilities, the remediation that we do on our legacy properties. And we also have regional transportation funded by the tax levy and a number of community programs that the Commission has initiated over the years. And anything left over after all those things are paid for is available to cash fund various non-airport capital investments. Next slide, please. This is the history of the tax levy. Beginning in 1990, state law changed so that the port could tax less than the maximum and still be able to bump up to that maximum if needed. Over the course of this period, the port has levied approximately 75% of the maximum on average, but you can see that it has varied over time with 50% in some years and up to 90% in other years as needed. But over the average over this period is about 75%, and that has roughly kept up with inflation. Next slide, please. This summer, the Commission had 2 budget retreats during which we discussed, among other things, the tax levy. Based on those discussions, staff has worked out the following approach to both the 2024 budget for the tax levy and for our 5-year draft plan of finance. So the approach includes continuing at this 75% of the maximum, which preserves a cushion that the port can tap into during times of adversity. And it also is a support of our good credit rating. When investors look at the port, when credit rating agencies look at the port, and they see that we have a pattern of taxing below our maximum, they view that very positively because it does give us flexibility to address adversity. The primary beneficiary of those strong credit ratings is the airport and helps keep the costs to the airport and the airlines low. The port also, the plan includes the port continuing to support the environmental remediation projects. What will be changing is the expectation of the amount that we will pay for those projects as a number of them begin to kick in terms of the spending. We expect that spending to increase. And to pay for those projects, we anticipate using a combination of levy cash and general obligation bonds. The funding approach also includes the continuation of funding for community programs at approximately the current level of $13 million out of the tax levy. Some of the programs also receive funding from other sources beyond the tax levy. And the remaining funds to be used for non-airport capital. Next slide, please. The port always considers the impact on taxpayers. So the proposed levy increase of about $4 million to $86.7 million also leads to an increase in the levy rate. To be clear, that rate is increasing because of a combination of the increase in the tax levy and a decrease in assessed value. The preliminary assessed value for 2024 is actually lower than the assessed value for 2023. So that leads to the calculation of what's called the millage rate, the cents per thousand of assessed value that property owners pay. In 2023, the median home value was $853,000. We don't have the 2024 number yet. The county will provide that in 2024. So applying that new rate to that same 2023 median home value, we calculate an increase of roughly $10 to the median homeowner. So, and just to put this in context, in 2023, the port's levy represented a little over 1% of the total amount that homeowners pay in various taxes to schools and other governments, city, county, etc. Next slide, please. This is an illustration of how the tax levy uses are expected to shift over the next 5 years. So looking at the last 5 years compared to the next 5 years, we still have the payment of general obligation bond debt service as the primary use of the tax levy. And we are expecting to issue additional GO bonds during this period of approximately $350 million. What's changing is the increase in the use of the levy for environmental remediation payments. So that will take approximately 25% of the tax levy over the next 5-year period. We'll also see a small increase in the percentage that goes to community programs, and that's because the community program funding has grown in the last few years. So when we look at the whole past 5-year period, we're picking up some years where that we didn't have as much funding of community programs. So what's decreasing is the use of the tax levy for capital. And that's one of the reasons we will be relying more on general obligation bonds for the next 5 years to help pay for some of the capital that won't be paid for from the tax levy. The little sliver of other, the past 5 years, most of that was the port's membership contribution to the Northwest Seaport Alliance. The last payment is expected to be made at the end of this year. For the next 5 years, that other includes the South Gateway, the Gateway Park South, as well as some other small items. All right. Are there any questions on the tax levy before we move to the plan of finance?
Commissioner Calkins.
Can you remind us, when you talk about the statutorily allowed maximum allowable levy, why couldn't we just say we want $1 billion next year? What prevents us from, sending it through the roof?
Yes. So there are 2 statutes that dictate the maximum. One is specific to ports, the other is general to property tax. At this point, it's that general limitation that restricts it. And that general limitation is commonly referred to as the 1% limit. So every year, the maximum levy increases by 1% plus a factor for new construction, which, when we've looked at it over time, on average, that's about a 2% increase each year. So each year that maximum increases by 2%. If the port wanted to go above the maximum, it would require a vote of the people. So within that maximum, the commission has full authority to vote, but beyond that requires a vote of the people.
And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but it's my understanding that there's a number of municipalities that are considering asking the legislature to change that. Have you heard any, because this 1% is not meant for a lot of municipalities, a real financial hardship as they face increased demand for services, a high inflationary environment, et cetera. Is there any discussion around that you're familiar with?
Yes, I think that discussion has heated up recently as inflation has outstripped that 1%. The limit factor used to be 6%. And then there was a Tim Eyman initiative, I've forgotten the year, I think it was back in the 1990s, that reduced that 6% limit to 1%. And at the time, there was a lot of concern that that was going to be a problem for municipalities because it wouldn't keep up with inflation. But then we've gone through a period of very low inflation, and so it hasn't been as much of a problem as anticipated. Plus, some municipalities have been able to have other extra levies for various things that are outside of their general levy. To get around that. But now with inflation as high as it is, I think there is more interest in raising that levy limit.
And what is the, barring that 1%, what is the port specific statutory limit
45 cents. And we were
per year increase?
45 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. So I believe that would translate into a maximum levy of over 300 million if we were able to be within that limit. But because the 1% limit is lower, we're bound by the 1%
Forgive me if you
limit.
just said dollar signs. Wow, 300 million per year. That would fund a lot of different projects. But I appreciate the background on the statutory maximum. That kind of helps to understand where that red line comes from on that on page 7. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Mohammed?
Thank you. On slide 10, I know that in slide 27 you're going to break down some of this numbers, but it's not further, it doesn't further explain where some of these dollars are going. In particular, are we, once the budget, the proposed budget is published online, will you further break down these numbers on slide 10 around the environmental piece? And then also the community programs. I'm looking at, like, for instance, the South King County Fund. There are a number of different cities that we're supporting. And the Sea-Tac Community Relief is called out on 27, but I am wondering, are we going to see this further broken down?
Yes, actually, in the appendix on slide 27 and 28 gives detail of the community programs.
Okay. Great.
And 29 gives detail of the capital plan. The environmental spending we do not break down because that information is protected.
Right, correct. And then I just had one last quick question on that slide. On the capital section, it goes from 28% to 15%. How do you balance out the budget? Where is that other 13% coming from?
It's a little bit of a problem-solving exercise, but we start with the priorities of use of the levy, and the capital spending is the last priority in the way we've approached this funding plan. So whatever isn't funded with the tax levy, we either look at general obligation bonds within our policy limits, or we move it to the general fund for funding.
Very good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner, did you
Felony.
want to, I'm sorry, Vice President, do we want to go to those slides? Did you want to look at those slides, or are you good?
It's good. I will look at the appendix. That was helpful.
Commissioner Fellman.
Thanks so much once again. I was just wondering, just generally, don't we usually pass the Seaport Alliance budget first before we get into this? Or was it because of my messing with the schedule due to my travel that we're going to do that Friday? So
The Alliance budget is typically right around the time of this presentation, and I can't recall which is first or which is second typically. But our passing of the port budget will occur after the passage of the Alliance budget. That's my understanding of the sequence. So it's just this briefing that's coming before.
right, but obviously it's really the briefing isn't the issue. It's the fact that we're publishing our draft budget this week before, right? So I just didn't know this. I don't think this is typically the way it's done. It's usually we have the Alliance revenue and debt is like taken right off the top, and then we talk about the rest. I mean, isn't that traditionally the way we've done this?
We do have a very iterative process with the Alliance. So we receive information from them and provide information to them throughout this whole budget process. So it is incorporated, as Scott will discuss, the expected capital plan for the Alliance is incorporated in our draft plan of finance. If you all change the capital plan at the Alliance meeting, then we will follow up with when we do the final budget with
Thank
any
you. It's a
changes.
pretty dynamic process these days. So
It is.
I also appreciate in following up on Commissioner Mohammed's question about the environment 25% jump from 8%. Now, I know we had the conversation last time that we were just going to sort of put aside, like whatever it was, I think it was $25 million. I think that was the number that was thrown out there, knowing that we're going to bank it for future expense. Is this a assumed liability, or is this just assuming we're banking some money?
So that 25% number represents an estimate of the environmental remediation spending that will occur over the next 5-year period. And as Executive Director Metrick mentioned in his comments, we are in conversations with you, including today, about the possibility of taking some of the levy funds and setting them aside to fund some of these expenses.
Right. I mean, it just strikes me at some point, given the status of like the increase in salaries, for example, that there's, new large expenses and other negative trends that just, knowing when those expenses come up, it seems like we should be spending the money at the time. It would be nice if we had the luxury just to put it in the piggy bank, but it seems like at this moment that's not great, in my opinion. But I also see, like, if you look at going back to Appendix 28, on page 28, I'm sorry, that it's not, the environment category is not just this liability. There's smaller things that are in there, like sustainable aviation fuel, air emission program, there's low carbon fuel standard, there's the airport community ecology funds, and the energy sustainability fund. What's interesting about some of those is that they're zeroed out. And so I don't, I see that the sustainable aviation fuel and air emission program is zeroed out for 2024. But when I asked about this at our last budget briefing, we were told there's like $1 million something to do this conventional pollutants program. So while it says zero here, we were told at the last meeting there's over $1 million to do that.
And that's in the airport budget. So it's not part of the tax levy.
In the budget. Very good. And so, and I guess I just don't understand what this low carbon fuel standard initiative, when we've passed the initiative, I don't know what we're putting money into. I guess it would just be good to get maybe a more detailed briefing on what some of those environmental programs that are beyond just cleanup liability issues. I thought I had one other question was, so just, can just get a point of reference, like, so we're gonna get this additional $4 million for the proposed increase, which is basically comes out to an additional $10 per $850,000 household. What is overall, Executive Metric, like, what is the estimate increase in salary that we're going to be subject to this year?
We'll be proposing 5% for CPI plus 2% pay for performance.
Yeah, and do you have like a ballpark, like that number overall?
Of the overall number of that, of the total increase, I don't have that off the top of my head.
But I mean, like,
because that's an increase over our total human capital or
yeah,
pay. It's just a percentage increase. Yeah.
This is going to be, I think, a lot bigger number than what we're talking about increasing here, and associated with inflation. This is a small increase given increasing environmental liabilities, increasing salaries, and increasing inflation. So, and just in terms of when people say, why are you raising the levy, there's a lot going on here that's not in the brightest picture.
When you look at all the factors you just talked about, including inflation against that, the 4.8%, we balance a lot of those things when we come up with a proposed tax levy increase.
All right, great. Well, thank you for that.
Ask one more question.
Yes, of course.
So I think I mention this every year, and I continue to. I just want to emphasize on slide. Where is she? Not too far, I think. On slide 9, Elizabeth, we had a unique thing happen in that the overall property values decreased from 23 to 2024. Is that what we're hearing?
That's correct. That's based on the preliminary assessed value from the county.
Okay, so when we say based on that, the estimated median home port tax is going from $80 to $90. That assumes that the total number of households remains the same, correct? Because the way we say we need X amount of money, we're going to divide that pro rata amongst all of the houses, properties, commercial properties, etc., in the county. So if the median is static, let's say, then if we add more houses, more buildings, more taxable items, then that number would be spread over a greater number of total units, correct?
So the calculation is the levy that the commission sets divided by the amount of the assessed value. That sets the levy rate. That rate is applied to the value of the houses.
So then if more houses are added, more buildings are added in a given year, then that amount is spread over those, they are then added to those who are taxed, correct?
It's not dependent on the number of houses. It depends on the calculated rate applied to the value of each house. And so what would happen is if more properties were added, assessed value would increase and the rate would decrease. And so each homeowner, assuming that value of the median home stays the same, would pay less than the $90.
Essentially what I'm saying is if more people are now bearing the burden of this, then any individual person would, as a percentage of the overall, would take on a lower burden. Is that correct?
Yes, indirectly, yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure that's so. Provided King County is growing, then we're spreading the burden over a larger number of businesses, residents that are paying that. So appreciate that. Thanks for the clarification.
Executive Director Mitchell.
I think just to add to that discussion, it's important, I think, as Elizabeth said, we set the amount. We don't, it's not like, then if the numbers change, we don't bring in more because we set the percentage. We set the amount and we work with the assessor on how to do that. That's an important point that we don't.
Yes, it is.
We set very targeted and we're strategic about it, and we don't, if things change, we don't bring in extra funds.
Point of reference, I keep on saying this, but you keep on using that same picture on page 9 of the house. That's hardly, it's an $850,000 median house, but certainly looks like mine. But it took an incredible hit on the evaluation. I'm happy that, I'm not selling anytime soon, so my tax rate's down, but like a remarkable amount of money, like almost $100,000. And so that's a pretty radical change over 1 year.
Thanks for that. So I guess I'm wondering, can you talk about, so it's not as if we could, is the tax levied equally across King County cities?
By law, it has to be applied equally.
Okay, so
that's the rate applied to the assessed value.
It's not as if we could exempt Covington, which is far away from the airport and not on the flight path, and it's not as if we could exempt Des Moines, which is disparately impacted by airport operations.
No, we have no control over that. Between state law and the county assessor, they would determine that. The exceptions are for low-income elderly, they can be exempt from taxes.
The exception would be for low-income folks or for the elderly, not for residents of a specific city.
Correct.
Are we allowed to dedicate a specific percentage of levy resources to a city?
The commission has wide latitude in how the levy is used within our statutory authority of how we spend money. So that would be the only limitation.
And I see that 25% is projected to go towards environmental causes and 12% towards community programs. What are some of the tools that we have to make sure that that equity is part of our assessment when spending tax levy funds?
The tax levy spending in those areas, well, for the community programs, is determined by the commission and the programs that are approved by the commission. And so the use of the tax levy in that area is really very discretionary. The environmental spending is dictated by the liabilities associated with legacy projects or legacy properties, and most of that is in the South King County, Duwamish River area.
Just this year, the commission rolled out a tool to be able to assess equity spend through our overall budget. Is there a way to chop that up to take a look specifically at tax levy funds?
We can look at the equity spending and what part of that is levy funded. That's primarily operating expenses, which would be paid from operating revenues, but some of the expenses are levy funded. So we can break that out.
Commissioner, if I can just talk about overall approach to this as well. If you look at environmental response for the uses of the tax levy, and you look at for GeoBond, debt service, and then capital investments. Those are, as we look at those are not broken down into, we operate two primary gateways, maritime and airport. Of course, the aviation stands by itself, and we look at those investments, in those that are benefited throughout King County. So even though that spend on the capital is within there, it's all the benefits. We know the economic benefits for all of those benefit everyone within King County, and those are the capital investments. Operating of those gateways is the biggest way we impact the economy here in King County, and actually the rest of the state as well. So that's why you see a lot of the tax levy funds going towards capital, which keeps those important gateways operating and maintaining those, as we heard today. So I'm just saying is there's different ways on the community programs and the spend. We do use equity as we look at those communities that are adjoining and making some of those community investments in those environmental cleanups are an important part of that and increase the quality of that too. I'm just saying we apply an overall approach, to a balanced approach to how we spend the tax levy in doing those. And it's I think we can break down where some of those tax levy uses in the spend go to, but it doesn't tell the whole story, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. And that's part of why having an equity index with a map available that shows disparately impacted environmental justice communities and how that overlays with the different programming and the different resources that we're dedicating back into those communities could be really useful for all of us. So thank you so much for that explanation. Anything else from commissioners before we move on in the presentation? All right.
Thank you and good afternoon. Next slide, please. So this slide provides a little background on the plan of finance. As you know, it's the funding plan for the port's 5-year CIP. And as Steve noted, to begin, we also look, obviously beyond the 5-year period at some of the ramifications and things sort of in the pipeline, and we'll touch on that a little bit on a later slide. This plan is provided each year to the commission as part of the budget process and is based on detailed operating and capital forecasts from our airport and non-airport lines of business, including the Northwest Seaport Alliance. From a funding perspective, we do bifurcate this out between the airport and the non-airport businesses, as you know, due to FAA rules on revenue diversion. And like any forecast, there will be changes, and the plan was created to be flexible and really help ensure that the port continues down a financially sustainable path. This plan also provides useful information to external stakeholders such as investors, rating agencies, and provides some good information on the well-being and the port's approach to financial stewardship. Next slide, please. So this slide covers the comprehensive non-airport capital plan over the next 5 years, which totals $913 million. Just as a reminder, the non-airport CIP includes the CIP from Maritime and EDD, as well as the port's 50% share of the Northwest Seaport Alliance. you were briefed by Stephanie Jones-Stebbins and Kelly Zupon and Dave McFadden at the last commission briefing on the Maritime and EDD CIP, and slide 38 in the appendix provides some of the background at a project level for your reference. The Northwest Seaport Alliance budget briefing is this Friday, and you'll be briefed on their $420 million CIP. So our funding plan covers the $210 million, which is our 50% share. The chart on the left shows the annual non-airport capital spending during the forecast period. And as you can see, the forecasted spending each year is greater than our prior year maximum annual spending for our non-airport businesses, which was back in 2009. So a significant amount of CIP in the pipeline. Next slide, please. So this slide covers the funding plan associated with that non-airport CIP that we just discussed. Operating sources account for 44% of the funding in this plan. That includes operating cash, which includes both existing non-airport general fund balances and future non-airport revenues. In total, those will fund approximately $305 million. Most of the operating cash flow for the non-airport businesses is derived from the Northwest Seaport Alliance. And slide 39 in the appendix provides some of that breakout if you're interested in seeing some of the detail. The port is also able to leverage some of the non-airport operating revenues in the form of future revenue bonds, which are assumed to fund $95 million of this CIP. The revenue bond capacity is due in part because of a decrease in existing revenue bond debt service during the forecast period beginning in 2027. The tax levy is expected to fund approximately 52% of the CIP. This includes levy cash, existing GEO bonds, and future GEO bonds. As you know, GEO bond debt service is paid from tax levy funds. And looking at the graph, you'll see $78 million of levy funding here. That represents the levy cash funding of the CIP. We've got $45 million of remaining GEO bond proceeds from our prior GEO bond issuance back in 2022. And we have forecasted the need for approximately $351 million of additional GEO bonds during the forecast period. Some of this issuance may come as early as next year. Next slide, please. So aviation staff briefed you on their on the airport CIP back on October 10th. Slide 36 in the appendix has some information on their $5 billion CIP. I'm not going to spend much time on the CIP itself, but this slide here will help cover the funding. Looking at the chart, revenue bonds are expected to fund over 80% of the airport CIP. This includes existing revenue bonds of about $400 million from our prior two bond issuances that occurred in 2021 and 2022. We are also expecting nearly $3.6 billion of future revenue bonds to fund the airport CIP, a portion of which likely to come as early as next year. Operating cash at the airport is expected to fund over $630 million of their CIP. This includes both existing cash and future airport cash flows. The airport has been building up their cash balances towards 18 months O&M liquidity target, which is expected to be reached by 2025. The airport does have some other unique funding sources for its capital plan, the biggest of which is capital grants. We've got nearly $360 million of capital grant funding for the airport CIP. These are almost entirely entitlement grants from the FAA, so they're AIP grants or the bipartisan infrastructure law. Next slide, please. So this is, I think, an important slide, and going back to what we touched on previously about the importance of looking beyond just the 5-year horizon. This helps us avoid making financial decisions now that may benefit us now, but have adverse impacts in the future. This slide outlines some of the key considerations and outcomes as it relates more specifically towards that longer-term view. So looking at the left, touching on a few of the assumptions that I think are important. We've talked about environmental. As we discussed with you at the July retreat, the port is anticipating and planning for known legacy environmental remediation costs that will require significant resources particularly in that second 5-year period. In terms of capital investments, we expect to have a continued need for capital investments at both our airport and non-airport properties. As mentioned at the last commission briefing, Maritime and EDD have identified over $400 million of capital projects that were postponed or deferred during the current 5-year forecast period that we continue to be mindful of. In community programs, we are assuming a continuation of funding needed for the various community programs at about the level we're funding them now. And we talked about some of that detail can be found in the appendix, particularly pages 27 and 28. Shifting to the right, looking at some of the results, the good news is that we can, based on this plan, we could fund almost $700 million of non-airport CIP in that second 5-year period. So this would include funding capacity for most of the $400 million of postponed or deferred maritime and EDD projects. One of the potential risks, however, is the need to maximize debt funding, both GO bonds and revenue bonds, to support these higher costs. So meaning the port would be fully leveraged within our established financial targets. So what does this all mean? It means the port's ability to respond to adverse or unintended or unanticipated events may require reducing spending or increasing the tax levy above the 75% that Elizabeth mentioned. Next slide, please.
So the recommendations are a reiteration of the bottom line up front that Executive Director Metric reviewed. We recommend continuing to manage the tax levy in a balanced way that provides for financial resilience and supports the port's good credit rating over the long term. We recommend preserving some levy capacity so that we can address higher environmental spending or in adverse changes to income that might require increases in the tax levy above that 75% of the maximum target. And we recommend considering setting aside some funds for environmental remediation. This would likely be a gradual approach, setting some funds aside over time to address the environmental remediation costs in the future. Next slide, please.
So slide 18 covers some of the finance initiatives that may be brought forward to the Commission over the next year or so. As mentioned previously, a significant portion of the airport CIP is expected to be funded with future revenue bonds, and we expect a portion of that funding to come from a new bond issuance next year. Staff will also continue to monitor the non-airport CIP and assess whether GO bonds will be needed in 2024 as well. The port does have outstanding debt, outstanding revenue bond debt that is actually callable and callable next year that may be able to be refunded for interest savings depending on market conditions. The staff continuously monitors its outstanding debt for such opportunities to refinance at lower costs. Finance staff will also continue to manage the port's variable rate debt credit agreements and renewals over the next year. And we are expecting to complete our financial advisor procurement later this year or early next year. Finally, the finance staff will continue to evaluate any funding alternatives that may be applicable, including TIFIA loans. This concludes our presentation. Happy to answer questions.
Commissioners, questions for staff? Commissioner Mohammed.
Thank you for that presentation. Yeah, I have a question around the City of Sea-Tac's community relief. Is there someone that could speak to that specific investment?
I can take that on. So
That's the ILA, right?
Yes, yes, it's a $1.4 million payment to the City of Sea-Tac each year as part of an interlocal agreement with the city that allowed for the Port of Seattle to do its own permitting, so we don't have to go through the City of Sea-Tac in order to get construction permits, which greatly expedites our ability to deliver capital.
So this is permitting, not programs or just
It's
dollars
used
that
for
the
safety, specifically within the city of Sea-Tac. So the use isn't related to permitting, but the genesis of the payment was in this ILA that included, they gave us the permitting authority and we gave them 1.4 million a year for safety.
Commissioner, you may be more familiar with it through your Joint Advisory Committee participation. I think you guys may have some sort of approval coming through their recommendation.
Yeah, and I asked the question because it's coming up in the public. There are a number of local city council members outside of the city of Sea-Tac who's interested in knowing what this dollar amount is and how come their city is not receiving the same sort of contribution. So it's helpful to hear exactly what these dollars are going towards. I did mention to many of them that I serve on JAC and exactly what those dollars is, but it's good for transparency purposes and for us to be accountable to the public. I had another question that's somewhat similar. Is the South King County Fund. Those dollars go to organizations that are serving South King County, cities like Des Moines, Berrien, Federal Way, Sea-Tac as well. The question that I had about, the question that I have around that investment, I don't know if there's someone here or online that could just briefly speak to it. When we're making that investment in the South King County funds, are the local cities being consulted? My understanding is yes, but I just want to make sure that, I don't know if that's a government relations question, but that's also another thing that I've heard, and I think since these dollars are coming out of the tax levy dollars and their community investments, it would be helpful for us to just explain what that process looks like. And if they're not being consulted, it is an opportunity for the commission to consider including consulting those cities and seeing if that is an area of investment that we would like to make.
Well, I think that's done, we can get you more additional information on it. It's done through an RFP process, I believe. So I have to look to see. I don't know. There's a review of the RFPs and I'm not sure if there's other processes in that where the city would be appropriate to consult with them as part of that process, but that's something definitely we can take a look at.
Yeah, not so much of when the RFP goes out and we're trying to contract with organizations, but it's the pre-work that I'm talking about. Do we consult the local cities before we even get to the step of putting out an RFP and thinking about contracting? My understanding is yes, but I just want to be able to confirm that as we're talking about these tax levy dollars and we're moving forward on some of these actions. So if someone can come back to me with that information, that would be helpful.
We can get back to you on that, Commissioner.
Perfect, thank you. That concludes my questions.
Commissioner Calkins.
No, I mean, I think we've had a lot of, from the budget retreats to the summer to this, I'm really excited to see this move toward a little bit of the development of a fund moving forward that will allow us to quickly meet our obligations associated with environmental cleanups in particular. So I just want to call that out. I think that's a really responsible thing to do. That when we first started talking about it, I used the metaphor of my own experience as a dad of 3 kids saving for college. Like, I know that that's out there, and I know I want to be ready for it. And although my kids won't get the benefit of the college education until they take it, I'm going to start saving now to make sure that that's available to them. And so, in much the same way, what damage was done in the past and will be cleaned up as quickly as possible. We want to just make sure that finances are not the issue that prevents us from doing that.
Commissioner Feldman.
But the alternate way that we've been dealing with this liability that always hangs over our head is keeping that buffer of the levy to be able to increase it when needed, right? So we can hedge our bets depending on when we know that these expenses are coming up. And we actually have a very wide range of what our liability is right now. And so as that is worked out, I certainly agree that we can't welch on our responsibilities, but I just know that there's different ways of approaching banking that capacity. And so that to me is very important. the thing that I mentioned that the last time we discussed, when you look at the levy, the chart that shows versus maximum versus the, you provide us with your best judgment. We have very little reason to question it, but it's one line, right? So you don't provide us with, and if we did this, we would be short that, or if we did this, we would have, greater risk of, default, whatever. And so what I was asking previously was, you're using best judgment based on all kinds of information we'll never have access to. But the question in terms of, are there some places where you're being more conservative and other places where you're being more bullish? I mean, is there, in the course of trying to evaluate this net judgment of yours, like what's the inflation rate going to be? You don't really give us the kind of the rationale behind where you drew that line, and by not providing a range of bounds to look at, it's, we've trusted you all along. We're very good at doing our budgeting, and so I just think from a transparency perspective, though, it would be just kind of good to be able to say, based on X, Y, or Z, this is why we're putting this forward, and having a range of choices, right?
Sure.
That's a very good point. I believe at the budget retreat, we showed you what would happen if we increased the levy by 5% each year, and within 10 years, we hit the maximum. So that would be one option to assume a higher increase each year to tap into those funds now. The recommendation is to leave some of that gap between the maximum and the actual levy, so that when we hit something, either the remediation payment that's coming sooner than we had anticipated, or a downturn in the economy that needs to be addressed, we have that cushion. So we do try to balance realism and conservatism in this planning. I would not say it's overly conservative, but it's resilient, and having things like our financial policies and that cushion, that 75% of maximum for planning purposes, provides a resiliency that allows us to not be overly conservative in other areas.
Commissioner Calkins.
So if we could look at slide 7 of the levy portion, sorry. Elizabeth, how much, going back, how much of the gap between the actual levy and the maximum allowable levy can we go back and then ask for from a 2010 or 2015 property owner?
So we can't go back and get levy that we didn't assess in
so
prior years.
It isn't bankable then. If we don't ask for it now, we can't go back and ask for it later. And so my point is, we're trying to balance between, at a time when there is a little bit of space and to take a little bit more, bank it now for that future liability. If we don't divert those dollars, they're gone for good. Whereas, I think this is the balance that we're talking about. The recommendation is, sure, you could take the maximum allowable and put that in a bank, and that would make it easier for some future commission because you'd have a little bit more. But instead of going that far, let's do a reasonable amount to begin that process. And I really appreciate staff effort over the course of this process to say, in fact, we don't need to increase it that much because there are some there's some cash flow that we can access from this year's budget and transfer over. And so instead of taking an enormous new jump in the levy to begin this fund, we actually have the cash flow to be able to do it now. And I think that's a reasonable balance between a marginal increase in the levy to support this and also banking some of the additional cash flow that we have generated this year to get this thing started. And I think that's, as you said, a reasonably conservative way start this process of creating a kind of rainy day fund or whatever we end up calling it. Thanks.
Well, I like to think of myself as the primary target for consuming this document that you've produced. And I am pleased to have received it. Thank you all for this book of goodness and for the very thorough presentation. The commission, a very, very small piece of this, are represented by commission asks. And those commission asks are based upon what we hear all year and all term long from the constituency. So as a primary targeted audience of this document, one of the things that I would love to be able to easily see and convey is how commission asks have been pitched or considered or approved, if this is the final document. I'd just like to recommend a section either in the index or the appendices that summarizes commissioner asks and totals. That would be really helpful for us in that continued effort for this document to tell the story of how we're honoring our triple bottom line. So with that, without any, yes, all right.
I've been trying to get my head around that question too.
Sure.
So like if the community programs are 19,728,000 offhand, and but the levy is generating 86.7 million. So if you just look at, it's like 23% of the overall levy revenue goes to community programs. As Executive Metric pointed out, though, the healthy organization is contributing to the triple bottom line, that we have communities benefiting from the revenues that we generate as well. But if we look at the levy, or actually, if you just look at our $19 million as compared to the $1.4 billion budget of the organization, to your point, it's a very small number. So sometimes I kind of think that, we're never going to balance the budget on the back of community programs. I mean, we can triple the community programs, and it still is pretty close to irrelevant to the bigger picture of things. I don't want to say irrelevant, but it's just, I think, important to keep in mind the context, the relative issue of these community programs relative to a $1.4 billion budget. And I think that's sort of where you were getting at. It's just good to be able to frame it as best I could.
Thanks. Commissioner Mohammed.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, to that point, the community benefits from all of the operations that we are working on. We are a public agency, so whether that is what's happening at our waterfront to the airport, they are benefiting from that. But I think they are most interested in talking about the tax levy dollars when we're out there. I know that Dave Kaplan is here, who is with our local government relations manager. I think Dave would like to speak on the question that I asked earlier, and I did check in before I called him up here, so everyone can relax.
I happen to be upstairs, but overheard the question, so I raced down here in case there was nobody here to answer it. Dave Kaplan, local government relations manager for the port. Your question regarding the South King County Fund, the state law that allows for the funding of programs to local community organizations is a very narrow focused one, and requires those projects to actually happen on public land. Cities typically tend to be the primary landholder in a jurisdiction, but so are school districts. So for example, there are projects, and in fact I think some of the grants that have been given out have been for projects that have been on school district grounds. So as long as it's on public property, those nonprofit organizations, so they have to work with the city, obviously, because the city gives the approval on that being located on their property, in the same way that the school district would if it was on school district property.
So then, are you saying yes to us or your team consulting with the local cities, the South King County cities, before those projects go into action, before we even talk about an RFP process? Are the local city council members or departments aware of the South King County Fund and our intention of where the investments are going to go?
AJ McClure and Elise Aiden could answer that better, but they do have the conversations with the local jurisdictions, because one of the questions that's posed is, have you actually had that conversation with who you're going to put your whose property you're going to do the work
on the application? Great. Well, thank you for that answer. And I think as we talk about renewing that fund and it coming out of the tax levy dollars, I just want to underscore that. So if AJ and Elise are listening, please note that. Thank you.
Commissioners, do we have any other comments?
Dave, before you leave. So it does help me here for 1 second, because the airport, the flight safety corridor, right, where we can cut trees on private property. We're also authorized to be able to plant trees on private property. So I'm just wondering, this may be just apples and oranges here, but it's public money going into private property, but one giveth, one taketh away. I'm not sure how that's maybe pertinent.
Well, regarding flight corridor safety program, we follow the local jurisdiction's requirements in terms of tree replacement and what the property owner wants in terms of that. In terms of obviously on our own property, we've been following the commission's guidance on the 4-to-1 placement and the maintenance of the property from there.
My point was just in terms of our ability to spend our dollars on private property. That was the,
I might be able to.
It's related to mitigation for the fact that we're having to remove the trees for safety reasons.
So, and this Pete Ramos, for the General Counsel for the Port. I think if I'm tracking right, our environmental RA's fund for environmental projects does happen on public lands under the state statute. So there's a limitation for that specific program. Flight corridor program is different authority completely. They're two separate statutory schemes. Does that go to your question?
I didn't know whether it was an overall language.
Yeah.
This is an FAA application, so
Yes, and it's also supported through state law, but yeah.
All right, commissioners, do we have any other questions or comments from staff? Is there a special part 3 to the presentation we don't know about? All right.
We won't spring that on you.
Well, very good. Thank you so much, and that concludes our business meeting agenda for the day. Thank you very much for the presentation. Commissioners, do you have any closing comments at this time or motions relating to committee referrals from at all? Any exciting travels coming up that anybody would like to share about?
I think we just send Sam for all that stuff at this point, right? Like, he's just our globetrotter.
Yes.
Well, I did have the pleasure of just coming back from Portugal, where we attended the Green Ports Conference, where we learned about, with Sandy Kilroy as well, that a lot about alternative fuels and things that ports can do to service that. Also got a chance to meet with the folks at Principal Power, learning about their interests in offshore wind in our area. And overall, it was a really kind of a great collection of people from different disciplines that made for a very productive thing. And I'm hoping that Sandy and I will be able to put together a better summary of details for you at another time.
Commissioner Feldman, I think you also have a keynote at a ecotourism conference that you helped kickstart last year that's currently taking place in Yakima that you're driving
Yeah,
to
so
right after
it's
this.
because I just came back from one place, I have to go run. And Snoqualmie's got snow in it right now. So yeah, tonight I leave to go to Yakima. On Thursday, there's the sustainable tourism component of the statewide tourism conference that we created last year is now being carried on by the Washington State Tourism Office. And so they asked me to kick off the conference, which was very nice of Dave Blanford. Thank you for reminding me.
Thank you for reminding us.
Well, since you asked, I am also leaving on Friday to Abu Dhabi to participate in the World Ports Conference, IAPH. I did participate in it last year. It was down the street though. It was in Vancouver. So this is going to be a longer trip, and it was very informative. I'm looking forward to going there, gaining new knowledge, and bringing that back to the Port of Seattle. Thank you.
All right. Executive Director Metrick, do you have any closing comments for us today?
No, thanks, commissioners, and thanks for the items you passed today, and thanks for your feedback, especially here on the budget as we come to the conclusion of those discussions on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And hearing no further comments and no further business, if there is no objection, then we are adjourned at 2:44 p.m.